very pleased to introduce Daryl Boeckers, who's going to talk to us today about this topic. He has taught Spanish at secondary level for 15 years. Out of Buffalo, Minnesota. He's done a lot of work with online and other kinds of instruction. And he's going to be talking to us today about how to use these mobile-assisted approaches in teaching lessons.
Fantastic. Thank you for the nice introduction. I'm thrilled to be here. As Dr. Tronen mentioned, I had the pleasure of teaching for 12 years at Buffalo High School, where I taught Spanish 1, Spanish 2 hybrid, which started about 4 years ago, and then Spanish 4 college in the schools, where we partnered with your institution, with our institution, as a dual enrollment option. So I teach in the LT Media Lab. Anybody been to the LT Media Lab over on St. Paul campus? Thank you. Come visit us. We're friendly on the St. Paul campus. As a part of the College of Education and Human Development. If you want to know more about LT and what we write about and publish and conference about, you can find us at lt.umn.edu. If you're a Twitter user, you can join the conversations that we have about language teaching and the occasional post about what I'm cooking in my kitchen. Those that know me well know that when I'm not teaching, I'm usually cooking for friends and family. So just some interesting things that you'll find there. Today's session is all about mobile-assisted language learning. So looking at how do devices aid in how students are learning language, and how do how is the teacher's instruction enhanced maybe by the use of MAL. I want to scratch the surface a little bit with the literature. I want to share with you a framework that we use frequently in LT called TPAC. Anybody familiar with TPAC? Great. So that's one that I'll just describe quickly. And then I also want to situate those with examples that I've used in the secondary setting and those that I use with the pre-service teachers that I really enjoy working with in the summer. So one of the courses that I teach in the summer is called Technology for Teaching and Learning, and it's specifically with about a cohort of 25 to 30 language teachers. And we look at it's kind of, think of it like a pedagogy meets ed tech course. It's a required course as a part of their teacher preparation. And then we'll have some time for some questions. So mobile-assisted language learning, described by Duman in 2015 as just anytime, anywhere learning, which really challenges language learning, from even 5 to 10 years ago. It was traditionally done always in a classroom with 4 walls. And we challenged that at Buffalo High School when we looked at hybrid language learning. And a conversation that I had with Dr. Tronen at the beginning here talked about I was ready after 10 years to teach something different. And I wanted to pitch that with this cohort of 6 to 8 teachers across disciplines. And we looked at having online and hybrid options. I was really an advocate for hybrid because we know the value of face-to-face interaction with language learners, and I didn't want to lose that. As I'm sure you're probably on the same page on that. So just scratching the surface a little bit about what I'm seeing in the work of MAL, mobile-assisted language learning, is this little pocket of research born out of the CALL research, but in journals like the British Journal of Educational Technology, we see some work done by Hayeti in 2013 where they examined very carefully like texting technology, SMS, maybe it was like a PDA, maybe it was a telephone. There are some ones that you can use, for example, in apps like iPod and iPad, for example. And what they found in that study is that users rated it as 80% effective, and that students that were using that texting option outperformed their peers that were not. So that's just kind of one quick example. Another one by Wu and PLOS 1 looked at in China preparing students for an English exam. So this researcher designed an app to help students prepare for this English exam. And they found that there was a statistically significant result then between pre and post test, which I find interesting, but I also think it's challenging for teachers, K-16 or otherwise, to design their own apps for language learning. That's not a skill set, right, that many teachers have, including myself. I'm not a computer scientist. I'm a language teacher, classically trained language teacher as a communicative language teacher in the 90s under the natural method up at UMD. One more quick study here from EdTech and Society is they look at 3 designs here by Ty in 2011 as having kind of 3 different designs: task authenticity, social and digital participation, and dynamics or communicative mediation. So in this analysis, they talk about there being kind of three designs in a traditional MAL study. A critic of MAL is a guy named Jack Burstyn out of Australia, according to this publication. I know he's been in several, maybe you're familiar with his work already. But in one study he writes that about a bring your own device that is more learner centered, which includes a really unique task about a burglary activity, that students were taking photographs and then adding text to help solve this burglary type activity. So think of it like more of like a performance task, which we see commonly, of course, in language teaching. But he comes out and says in an analysis in 2012 in Call about some real concerns, and they're the same concerns that I have about MAL, which is kind of why I see some opportunity, in particular personalizing learning and more constructivist approaches, right? Because MAL has a bad rap along with a lot of other technology, that it's just this rote memorization of flashcards and nothing else. Like it's just glorified 3x5 cards. But in the sense that we can look at, there are some real opportunities to counter it being teacher-centered, to counter it being more of a behaviorist approach. I want to skip to the gaps here in the literature where I think some work that we're doing in LT Media Lab is working hard to examine what is the role in language and technology. There's a need for a theoretical framework or a pedagogical orientation in MAL, and some of those ideas come from that course that I teach in the summertime that I'm working with those pre-service teachers. But today I'm going to share about how this looks like in terms of Bloom's taxonomy. So it's actually been revised since I learned about Benjamin Bloom's work. I learned about it in the 90s, but there's been kind of this refreshed, updated version which I'll share a little bit with you. TPAC is the extension of the work from Lee Schulman in the 80s. He talked about teachers needing to be experts in their content and also be able to deliver that content. And then 2 writers from Michigan Tech, or rather Michigan State, Punya Mishra and Matthew Keller, write about this extension of technology on that as a third lens that teachers should design instruction or experiences to the center. Now, in my 15 years of teaching secondary Spanish, I was not always in the center. Buffalo High School, which is a part of Buffalo, Hanover, Montrose schools, is not a one-to-one initiative school, right? Not all students are connected to Wi-Fi. Not all days that I was teaching Spanish were they ever connected to Wi-Fi. They were specifically designed experiences where students were maybe recording a commercial about why to come visit Madrid after having read a tourist brochure about what there is to do, or an online resource like the Guía de Ocio, the city guide of how you navigate Madrid. But they talk about specifically designing instruction for the center. But I have to say, when I talk to my wife about TPAC, she's a 5th grade teacher, special ed background also, she feels like more of an expert in pedagogy, where she's constantly having to differentiate that instruction, for example, for her learners. Or sometimes, have you ever been in a tech-rich setting where you thought, what's the purpose of the use of tech here? Or maybe a kind of a classic university professor profile is someone that really is rich in content but isn't always sure how to communicate that sometimes. So when we situate that within L2, learning or teaching, I think of myself as trained as a communicative language teacher. Here's my content, maybe specific to a chapter or a theme. And then lastly, choosing a tool that I want to use. Oftentimes in meetings when I work with language teachers, they always say, or sometimes they'll say, Daryl, I've got a brand new cart of iPads. What do I do with them? And my response back to that teacher is, what do you want your students to do with them? What do you want the task? My friend Lauren Rosen in UW-Madison talks about leading with the task. What do you want your students to accomplish? And I'm going to show you a load of examples coming up here shortly on what those might look like at different levels of blooms. I talked about my passion for being in the kitchen, and I talk about pedagogy as pasta. So looking at how making handmade pasta is like learning and teaching language. Okay, so common things. We want to think about starch as a base, right? So like our pedagogy or our content area, think of that as a base, and then think about adding things on it like proteins and sauce later. I want you to think about using packaged versus fresh ingredients to access authentic resources, maybe like that city guide that I mentioned earlier. And I think one of the most important pieces is think about language learning being memorable. Right? When you ask kids 5 years later, what do you remember about your class at Buffalo High School, they're probably not going to talk about the notes that they took on possessive adjectives. But maybe they'll describe teaming up with a partner and creating a dialogue like I had asked a former student of mine, Austin. Think of the lowest level of Bloom's taxonomy as remembering as spaghetti. Not a lot of people describe spaghetti as probably their most memorable dish, but think of it instead as something that can get you to the next meal. Right? If you're hungry, sure, spaghetti sounds great, but these are tasks that students are doing or learning objectives that students are doing that are necessary. Don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking declarative knowledge here. What I am interested in is weaving throughout Bloom's taxonomy with some examples. How many people are iTunes users? For music or otherwise, right? There's a lot of things you can do within iTunes. Any German teachers here? I know there's at least one. Okay, fabulous. So if I search in iTunes in the store, I can search, by the way, this is dual platform, so Windows users and iOS users. Dan, how is that pronounced up there? I would pronounce it Munich if I was in L1, right? You would pronounce it? Thank you so much for your help on that. I really appreciate that. So if I search for that, I will find this list of apps. So the one that stands out to me is if I was working with students on directions, or if I knew I was going to travel with students shortly to the city of Munich, pronounced better by Dan here. Maybe I want to open up that app just to find out what is there to find out in that app. And then in specific, what if we're working on commands? What if I want students to, what if we want to contextualize the use of commands using this metro subway map that's going to be in L2 that students have to navigate and maybe get from point A to point B. In the same city search of Munich, I find that these podcasts, so this is just one search using one city name. And if you have your phone or your laptop out, maybe open up iTunes just to do the same fun search. But I can find that there's music in Munich, and maybe I can find out what locals are talking about in terms of the local music before I travel there also. The next level of searches within this same app is there are iTunes U episodes, and maybe these might be a better fit for higher ed or challenging a high flyer student or heritage learner. And then the next level of it is that there are audiobooks available also. So this is one app and this is one search. So just think about what are areas or what are topics that you're looking at, your content, and then search maybe, I would invite you to search in L2. That's a common miss by some language teachers, that they'll forget to just simply search in L2, which I think is important. In the next level, I hope you've eaten at this point, because I'm going to talk about lots of levels of pasta. Okay, so these are the list of tasks that students are doing in the level of understanding, which I'll call lasagna, where students are predicting, restating, and comparing. And in that, I've used Skype, for example, in the language setting. Think Anybody taught or taken 1003 levels of language here, specifically Spanish? Who are my Spanish teachers? Okay, so 1003. Gabriela, you know that well. It is Gabriela. Venga. Perfecto. So 1003, we look at Spanish. At the high school, it was Spanish 4 Intermediate, 1003 first semester. Chapter 2 was Technology in Progress. So I happened to catch this news clip, and I want you to think, if you're thinking the same thing I was as a language teacher during this. I just caught it on Care 11 one night.
Snowplows were finally able to punch through the snow drifts that caused parts of I-9 to close and several state highways. Many reopened at about noon today. While you and your car may not be feeling this weather, there is actually something that runs better in the cold. Care 11's Voicethread explains.
Below zero is harder to show than to feel. But take our word, it's been proven this week at St. John's University. The perfect contract.
It's been colder the last few days.
Quote an engineer born in Africa,
So this is unusual.
Mario Monasterio. Latest project.
This is a very good day.
It sits on the edge of the St. John's campus, 2.5 acres of solar panels put up this past fall in a cornfield, generating photovoltaic electricity and challenging assumptions about solar energy.
So here I catch solar energy story, St. John's, St. Ben's area, right? Collegeville, Minnesota. Last name Monasterio. Now, as a Spanish teacher, my ears perk up and I say, wow, Monasterio, what are the chances that he's a speaker of Spanish? So I go to the next morning, I find that colleague that you trust, and you say, what do you think of this? What if I invite Mario Monasterio to join our class to talk about green energy in the work that he's doing 45 minutes away in Eden Prairie? And the trusted colleague, Ryan, said, what are you going to lose? Like, if you email Mario Monasterio, are you ever going to run into him? And I said, probably not, right? So that morning, during prep, I crank out an email, and about 2 hours later, I get a response from Mario Monasterio with about 6 options to choose from to meet by Skype. And I asked for 20 minutes. So what did I do with my students? Much like this setup with an LCD projector, students in this area, there was a webcam here. So he was like, from his iPhone in his office, connecting with our students at Buffalo High School about green energies via Skype. So what did I do before my students engaged in that conversation? We created questions before the day of the Skype chat, so that we just didn't show up and say, well, what do you want to ask Mario? So we had a list of about 20 questions. I asked for 20 minutes, and 70 minutes later, and after lots of like pacing around the room nervously, like, is this going to tank or is this really going to fly? I found that my students were engaging in a conversation in L2 from Buffalo High School about green energy from an expert that works in the field. So my question to you is, who could be your Mario Monasterio? Who would you invite to your classroom? So what are some ideas that you're thinking of? Who is your Mario? If you work with teachers, who would you hope that they invite? Is there a content area that you're thinking of? This is your chance to participate. Who would you bring in? I'll let that idea steep for just a little bit longer. I took that to another level. I was a part of a read group. It was the staff read book committee. We read books as a staff, and we were a committee of about 3 or 5 people that made some suggestions on 3 books to read as a staff during the course of the year. And we read a great book called Entertaining an Elephant by Bill McBride. And I just asked the same question to Ryan and said, hey, what if we just invite Dr. McBride to join us via Skype to chat with 10 teachers, 12 teachers that decided to read his book? And he was thrilled to. I didn't charge us a dime to do it, and he was thrilled to join us by Skype, and he even sported a little Minnesota shirt the day that he chatted with us? Do you think that that's something that those teachers remember 5, 10 years later? My guess is yes. My guess is yes. In the next level of pasta, fettuccine alfredo, or applying the work done by Benjamin Bloom, these are the tasks that students are doing. And maybe they're doing that with the help of an Intel visual ranking tool. This is both an app and it's web-based. Okay, so it's a little tedious on the front end the first time, but just trust me, this is a really rich activity where students can just compare a list. Now some people say, Daryl, couldn't you just do this with butcher paper and just have students create a list of 1 to 10 on what their most grave or serious ecological concerns are in the area locally or in Costa Rica, which we had just read about? Couldn't you just do it paper pencil? Yes, you could. But there's 2 things that I love about this app. The first one is that when you double click whatever it is that you're sorting, winter activities in Minnesota, top 10 most grave concerns ecologically. You could go on and on. Characteristics of a friend. What's the most important characteristic of a friend? Think about all these different content areas that we can engage to sort these out. When you double click them, what do you suspect happens? What are you able to do now? So like comment on them, right? So if I rank acid rain as the second least grave concern about what's happening in the environment, then I have to justify why. Now, selfishly as a Spanish teacher, I was wanting to model then the use of subjunctive of it's necessary that, right? I wanted to show them and model some uses of not just subjunctive, but I wanted this to be a lesson on the environment that just happened to elicit the use of subjunctive, if that helps. And there's kind of one more element that kicks this up a notch, in that you can compare what did group 1 order versus what did group 2 order. And now you can see, well, group 1, now you have to tell me why they put this, the lowering level of fertility, why is it second to the bottom here and why is it in the middle for group 2? So you can set up this kind of structured debate as a part of using this content. So that tool is called Intel Visual Ranking Tool. All of these apps and ideas with some handouts are all listed at my website, darylboeckers.com, if you click on pasta page. So if you want to write down that tool, you can. It's always back to pasta. That's what it always boils down to with me. All right, I'm done with the puns, I think, with pasta. Analyzing the next level in Bloom's taxonomy, I'll call Manny Cote or Ziti al forno. Boy, did I get some smiles. I gave this presentation, part of this presentation, in New York to a bunch of Italian teachers. And they kind of raked me over the coals of my pronunciation of the Italian language. So they were kind. But they were just teasing, how a Minnesotan would pronounce. But these are the tasks that students are doing in this level of analyzing. And when we do, we can use a tool like Nearpod, which is web-based and an app. Anybody yet familiar with Nearpod? Great. So it's a great way to share content with students and also make for either a student-paced or a teacher-led presentation. You can change the pace on it, much like Socrative, however you want to pronounce it. But it's a great way to take a slideshow of content and then share it out, so that students can access that. And one example that I have used in the past is, what if I just took a simple painting that we were going to examine in that chapter and then ask some questions around that and maybe connect them to some web-based content along the way. Like situate it, contextualize it historically for my students. So you can share it out that way as an audience, or you can have it be, again, student-paced. So that's using Nearpod. Information for that is at nearpod.com. Spaghetti alla carbonara is the next pasta-like analogy here for evaluating. We're climbing up this ladder of Bloom's taxonomy. And in it, We want to use verbs like prioritize, decide, and choose. And this is when you might use Flipgrid. Flipgrid is a tool that was developed out of our office by Dr. Charles Miller. It is a great, how many are familiar with Flipgrid? Maybe we'll go to the next idea because you're all familiar with it. That's good. Let me show you some examples of the questions that I borrowed from an English teacher. You know, one great thing about teaching is you don't have to have all the good ideas, right? So I sat in on an English 10 class by Tracy Hagstrom, a dear friend of mine, and she was asking great questions like, would you rather live 100 years of poverty or only 30 years being wealthy and then die at age 30? I thought, wow, you learn a lot about students when you pose questions like that. And then in addition to that, you could farm those out and do those online and maybe do 4 questions a quarter or however it fits into your teaching setting. So there are a lot of ways that this could look. Does fashion drive art or does art drive fashion? Better fit for an intermediate or advanced course, obviously. Describe your perfect night. Boy, you learn a lot about people when you find out about the perfect night. Would you rather, this is a good one for language teachers. Would you rather leave the country forever and never come back to Minnesota, or would you rather stay in Minnesota forever, never leaving? What would you rather do? That's a good conversation starter. These come from a book called Book of Questions. Again, these were journal entries that Tracy was doing with her students, and I thought, why am I not doing this yet? Why can't I start these as, these could be done on Flipgrid, these could be done as a bell ringer, like take the first 2 minutes to talk to your friend about this. This just happens to have a digital spin of having that web interface, that video response, and it's capped at 90 seconds. Okay, my next level is called Risotto, the highest level. This is the one that I really want to share. And people say, Daryl, risotto's not made with pasta, it's made with rice. I understand that. I'm actually cooking it on Saturday for a group of other couples for Valentine's weekend. There's a reason that I chose that, because in the work done by Joan Hughes, who graduated, or who taught here rather, in the LT Media Lab, she looks at how technology integration is assessed. So a lot like SAMR or SAMR, however you pronounce it. Anybody familiar with SAMR? Okay, so like, how is it being used? Joan Hughes says, what if we look at it in terms of, are you just replacing something that's analog with something digital? Are you amplifying it? Are you able to do something more efficiently? Or are you transforming the learning objectives? Are you able to do things you weren't able to do without technology as a result of engaging students with that tech? So that's why it's different. It's transformed. It looks different. They cook very similarly, right? Anybody made risotto before? Like 16 minutes, start to finish, right? Similar time, and then you ladle in broth into your butter and wine, and you create this nice little reduction with rice into yumminess. These are the activities that students are doing. So in creating the highest level, students are imagining, inventing, creating, planning. One of my very favorite activities when I was teaching high school was called like just weekly check-in. Just check in with me. Tell me things that you did this week, that you're doing today, and you're going to do soon. This I created as a result of, we had an interview at the end of 1003, which was our level 4 at the high school. And you can just about imagine what students were feeling like in high school when they knew they were going to be one-on-one with their teacher talking about a topic connected to the content from the course. So what I did is I was trained by the CIS people. Gabriela, you know what I'm thinking about that interview at the end of 1003. That I needed to be listening for control in past, present, and future tenses. So I wanted to give them a practice to be able to do that, not connected to the interview, in a different setting. So I did this weekly check-in. And there are lots of tools that you can do this with. Students could record from a phone and just share the phone file through Drive or Dropbox. You could use a site called MailView, MailVU.com. I'll write it down because it's a common misspell. It's also on the site. That's a V. It is a site and it's also an app for Droid and iOS. And I had students check in every other week. So like, okay, group A, I'm going to wait for your video and you're going to send me a video this week. Could be Monday, it could be Thursday. Send me a video this week on what's going on. Remember we talked about past, present, and future. Great. Group B, next week, I'm going to get your videos. And what I would find is examples like what Maddie recorded. And I have Maddie's permission to use this video file. Let's see what Maddie did this week.
Hola, señor. Fue un super semana porque yo gané un A en mi examen de matemáticas. Fui muy emocionada. Miércoles yo trabajé en el restaurante.
Okay, I brought my strongest examples from Buffalo, okay? I did not bring mediocre examples, okay? She's had travel experience and she's a strong student.
Con la familia hacemos comida auténtica y yo escuché mucho español. Fue muy divertido. Jueves yo trabajé también y en la noche de jueves ayudé a mi familia en nuestra sotoño. Después de todo la lluvia había mucho agua, pero ahora todo está bien. Viernes, Victoria y yo fuimos al cine. Vimos la película Película con Zac Efron. Fue un ciclo perfecto, me gustó mucho. Hoy corto el césped y hace tarea y mañana voy a escribir mi mesa redonda y mi familia mi familia y yo celebraremos Memorial Day. Visitaremos mi bisabuelo y bisabuela en el cementerio. Buen lunes, señor. Hasta martes.
So what happened in Maddie's week for the non-speakers of Spanish? Let's help them out. What happened? A in the exam.
She went to see a movie.
Saw the movie with her friend. She did, at a restaurant where they serve authentic food. At a Mexican restaurant. Any others? Water in the basement. Did you see how hard she was working to fish for the word sótano? Right? Did she read this or did she tell it? She did, and you can tell by those clues. This is why I like video in language if we're going to do check-ins like this, right? Once students get over the awkward, weird factor of video, they just settle in, and now you can say, it's so much different of fui con mi familia versus fuimos como familia a una película. You can tell the difference between telling and reading, okay? So of course she did a superstar job. She could have shared this file with me using Drive, Dropbox, or the other one that I mentioned too in MailView. But this is how it's assessed. This was a participation grade that was recorded 4 times in the last quarter, so the last 8 weeks of class, every other week. Some teachers say, Daryl, how can you manage watching 30 students' videos 4 times? And to me, this is like the art exhibit for the art teacher. It's the concert for the orchestra teacher. Like to just listen to what Maddie's going to share with me. I learned so much about my students as a result of doing this, right? Because Maddie wasn't the student that would just walk in and just share about her week. So I got to know a lot about my students by doing these weekly check-ins. The app is simple. You could just use camera function on a phone, or the other ones that I had also shared, tools like MailView. Questions about ¿Qué tal la semana? How was your week? It's also listed at the pasta page. The next one is a tool called Critical Respond. It's actually a pedagogy out of visual arts. Anybody yet familiar with critical response? Anybody with a visual arts background? I got the idea from an art teacher. And I'm going to quickly switch to internet so I can show you critical response. I want to show you what this looks like. So it's a set of 5 questions. And in 1003 in Spanish, we connected literature, visual art, ritmos, imágenes, y páginas, and literature, visual art, and music to the common theme each and every chapter, okay? And when I do this, I can bring up an image and just ask students these quick 5 prompts. What do you see with your eyes? So then we zoom in on the painting. And I ask students, just what do you notice? And then I might particularly go through step by step, what is this? What is that going to the right? Is that a boy or a girl? Is it a dog? Is it a sheep? Does it matter? What is all this? And then the next question is, what do you think of when you see it? Zoom back out. This is using a tool called Prezi. Anybody familiar with Prezi? Commonly used for instruction. I like to use it in terms of prompting students with either text or visual art and just kind of navigate this like a canvas. I think of Prezi as a canvas. It doesn't function like PowerPoint in the sense that it's a great big canvas and you can zoom out, move over, and then zoom in, and you can add rich things like media along the way. So what do you feel? Now, if you're working with a novice or intermediate learner, maybe have 20 emotions that are kind of go-to emotions throughout the course of a semester, right? Because if you ask a boy 9th through 12th grade, what do you feel when you see this? They're going to say, I feel sad, right? So, and this is a good chance for us to really add some emotions that students need in terms of language learning. So if they see the word culpable, the word for guilty, and student asks, what does culpable mean? ¿Cómo se dice culpable? Then this is a good opportunity to circumlocute, right? To teach around that word to say, when do you feel guilty, right? Or when do you feel responsible is another one. I'm thinking in particular for this piece of art. What questions does this raise is the 4th question. This is a set of questions that's used in Minneapolis Public Schools in their art department also. If you do a search on critical response Minneapolis Public Schools, there's a really some nice vignettes of how they're using it in the arts. And then the last one in the series from this pedagogy is called what does the author intend? What's the hope? Why do you think this artist made this collage? And then the extension that I added is, how does this connect with the theme of technology and progress? So trying to kind of wrap that all together into that. So that is critical response. I have a couple more examples in the creating level. And one is using Toontastic. I'm betting that a lot of you use stories, right? Digital storytelling maybe. One that is really simple to use, especially with kiddos, maybe not necessarily in the higher ed setting, but one that I use frequently is called Toontastic. And I'll actually, because I'm a little limited on time here, you click on, this is iOS specific if I haven't already mentioned it. Click on, you're creating a cartoon. You can talk through an L2. Unfortunately, these are still in English. But you could just say, what does it mean to have a good story? So you could start the conversation that way. And then clicking on edit, which is the paintbrush, which is why this is so K5 friendly. And then pick, where do you want it to happen? On a pirate ship or in the park? Who are your characters going to be? Boy, students come alive when they're the monkey that's on the screen and they're moving around and they're able to record their own voice and then save it to a teacher channel that's really safe. There's a real security component that I really like about Toontastic. So then this is what the end product would look like. You know, it would just come alive as a video because you're able to move it around and record your own voice. How many users of Google Voice? Okay, Google Voice is a free option within Google account, so you should have one as a U of M staff member, faculty member. It's like voicemail that's been digitized with a text-in function. Maybe you ask students to call this number just like you would on your normal voicemail. Hey, leave an invitation to a party, or leave me instructions to a restaurant because I've never been to this restaurant. Or maybe it's more like a paired activity where you're leaving it. What I love about Google Voice is that it has one place where it records to, and it's really easily accessed. Okay? Here are some, here's an idea of how I've used it too, is you have a lost friend in Segovia, a city that I struggle to navigate in Spain. And you can bring in Google Maps and say, take me from point A to point B, but don't forget there's, construction here to kind of, to make it a little harder to elicit more use of language there. So this is where students are phoning into kind of a third-party phone number. I like that it's third-party, that it's students not calling my mobile number, it's calling this third-party Google number, right? Which is a smart idea as a teacher. So directions in Segovia. Another one was I had a computer lab setting when I was doing a completely online final exam for the first time. And I had students choose between prompt 1 and prompt 2. Prompt 1, here's a set of 6 images. Tell me what happened. Or tell me what's happening. Or just describe the 6 images. Maybe as a narrative, maybe as dialogue. Your friend Emilio is going to stay at Mike's house. Tell him a little bit about Mike's house, what happens at Mike's house, chores of that house, where you think your friend Emilio might stay during his homestay was another one. So these are 2 prompts. Students were able to choose between those 2 prompts, and this was delivered through Moodle. Okay, the last example here, I'm using an app called Voicethread. How many are using Voicethread already? It's web-based and an app. They offer really nice tutorials through U of M because VoiceThread is a component within Moodle. They have really nice, I had one experience with their tutorials or their, I guess it was a WebEx maybe, and they just did a really nice job of making sure that we understood how we were going to use it. It's a good icebreaker activity online if you're doing a hybrid course, for example. But let me just show you Macy's example. Think of it as PowerPoint that's online, but it also has media options. The beauty, though, in VoiceThread is that students can comment on other students' threads if you want to set it up that way. So an example of, tell me a little bit about your house. And I ask a student to describe her house. Where'd you go, Firefox? Here we go. VoiceThread. So here's Macy's example. You could say, find an image of a home also, because not all students are willing to share about their home. Maybe not everybody wants to describe their home. I once got a conversation from a mother at conferences, and she looked a little angry when she sat down at the conferences at Buffalo High School. And she said, you know what, Mr. Boeckers, I cleaned my house for 4 hours before my student did that activity. And I just want to personally thank you. And I thought, wow, I didn't see that coming as a use of technology, that conversation. This is Macy describing her house.
Bienvenidos a mi casa. Yo vivo en Buffalo, Minnesota. Mi casa es blanca y tiene una puerta verde. Yo vivo en mi casa con mi familia.
It's a scripted.
Mi familia es mi padre, madre, 2 hermanos y un perro. En mi casa hay 4 dormitorios, 4 baños y un despacho. La casa es media. La sala, el comedor y la cocina están en la planta baja. 2 dormitorios y 2 baños están en el primer piso.
So you can see that you can go on and find out more images and more description from Macy, which I found out this week that she's coming to the U next year. So you're going to see, hopefully see Macy in your language classroom soon. She's, as you can tell, a dynamite student. This was level 1, chapter 6. So this is near the tail end of the course. where students are using a scripted description of their house and walking through to describe home. You can do this in a number of ways. But that's a little bit about Voicethread. Voicethread is an app and a site, as a gentle reminder. Some connections here at the very end. You know, I hope that you walk away today with 1 to 3 ideas that you can implement, maybe even at the end of this year. So this semester still. What are 1 to 3 ideas that you would like to see as a result of using mobile technologies? And I also think it's important for us to just look at what's the role of technology. I actually got one of my biggest compliments this last summer from a teacher in the MED program, in the initial licensure program. She said at the end of the course, it's only 7 sessions, it's a 1.5 credit course, and she said on the way out, Daryl, this course really isn't about technology, is it? And I smiled and I said, boy, I like the way you think. And I said, tell me more. And she said, this course is really about learning, isn't it? And I said, you're exactly right. And I said, and if we're really purposeful about when and where we're using tech, and that we're not just using tech for the sake of tech itself, that we're using it for language learning, I mean, we get it in student hands. I think it's really important. One of the best questions that I got from a colleague at Buffalo was, Daryl, are you using it in the front of the room, or is it in student hands? And I think it's tough for teachers to get that sometimes into student hands. And I think it's easy with MAL. So that to me is the goal. It's really about language learning. Some resources here at the end before I get you the references. MWALT. Dan and I have gone before in the past. It's a great conference that's in the Midwest. It's an association of language teachers that really focus on the role that technology plays. And it's one that I'm thankful for. TIES is close to my side of town. TIES.k12.mn.us trains specifically on tech across disciplines. They have great little kind of half-day, full-day workshops. So if you want more, like they have specific, if you want to learn more about how to use iPads K5, they have an 8-hour workshop waiting for you. And they're amazing. They're usually teachers that are giving the sessions. MCTLC.org, if you're not yet familiar with MCTLC, it is the Minnesota chapter of ACTFL, and we have a conference in the latter half of October. And then IALT Journal is one to look for in terms of the research. It is kind of like the larger umbrella to MWALT. Would you agree with that, Dan? It's kind of like yeah, thank you. Questions or comments that you want to raise right away while I'm going to share the resources first. Comments or questions? Yeah.
Can you comment a little bit about what's the learning curve for students in your experiences? And I'm also wondering if there's any recycling in your program in regards to the technologies that are used in your courses. Like, is there a follow-up after they leave your class?
Fabulous question. I think it's always important to support technology integration with things like handouts and screencasts so that students are kind of on a level playing field to know that if we're going to work with Voicethread in class, I'm going to show you how to do it in class, and then you're expected to complete this assignment in the next week or two, that they're supported with handouts and screencasts. So I think that's really important, that it's not just I'm going to tell you how to do it once and then just be done, but instead that there's support along the way. The second part of your question, if I understand it right, is like, are you curious to find out if like English and Publications is also using Voicethread, so that's why is that right?
Right, like let's say a student comes into your class and they have to learn about these 5 different technologies.
Sure.
Do they get to use it some other way, other than in your class, like other teachers copying some of the
It's a great
uses?
question. You know, I guess I never intentionally.
Sorry to interrupt, and it goes back to the learning curve.
Sure.
Because if you spend a month teaching them about how to use a particular technology, perhaps
Right.
it's something that can be repurposed.
It's a fabulous question. I never specifically used the tools that other teachers were already using. I tried to look at what's the task. And, you know, I guess I collaborated with other colleagues that had experience with those tools. It would be smart to be intentional about a program, like if you were going to work in a high school, for example, and you could be intentional to say, look, I'm using Voicethread here. You know, the trouble with that is tools are always changing, right? Like I'm updating the site monthly with, oh, Voicethread no longer looks like this. It has a new look to it. Google Forms, for example, updated in fall. It doesn't look anything like what it used to. So I think that's maybe one of the challenges in MAL is the sense that the tools are always changing. So it might be best if you're looking at creating some kind of a segment of a program, for example, to be specific to say, let's consider using similar tools, you know, but still keep that artist touch of teaching with tech, which I think is also really important. Good question, Dan? Oh, sure.
Well, mine wasn't going to be a question, it's going to be a comment. I mean, it looks like, I mean, the video submission that you have been doing could have been left up to them. In other words, if they've learned a video recording tool in another place, they can use it in this situation, rather than having to teach them how to do that.
Smart.
That's one thing that I think we're discovering is that students come to us with some background, and if we don't insist they use the tool that we're providing, they may be able to do it other ways.
I like that a lot.
Let me thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure's mine. Thanks for the invitation.